Welcome to the Aboriginal channel. On this episode, we're going to be looking into some facts that's going to show us an important part of how the Matrix was built. And in order to do that, I'm going to need your help to figure out what side of the definition for shit-eating grin this shit-eating grin falls on. Here at the Wiktionary, a free dictionary online, says that shit-eating grin is a broad smile indicating self-awareness that may suggest self-satisfaction, smugness, discomfort, or embarrassment. I'm going to go with self-satisfaction because I don't see any smugness, discomfort, or embarrassment. So for that one, it's self-satisfaction. Now, when we go down here to the usage notes, the term is ambiguous and may indicate either a genuine broad smile, smug happiness, or a fake broad smile, trying to hide or get away with something. I would say it's a bit of both. I believe he was genuinely happy about getting away with something. So right here on the nationalarchives.gov website, it says that Will Rogers and his wife in 1935 is when that picture was taken. Says Will's application to the Dawes Commission in 1900 was accepted, and he was enrolled as a member of the Cherokee Nation. The biggest question, though, I have regarding this image right here is the important documents folder in her hand or the envelopes in his having anything to do with the shit-eating grin on his face. To shed light on that, we got to go over here to the Judicial Toolkit on Indian Law, an overview of key federal Indian law cases. So in 1823, basically, they was saying that an Indian's title of occupancy was only valid unless recognized by treaty, statute, or executive order, and could be taken by the federal government free of the strictures of the Just Compensation Clause of the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, meaning they could take your land without compensating you right there in 1823, not too long after they started getting gold out of Virginia and North Carolina, and 6 years before the major gold rush in Georgia, and 7 years before the gold rush in Alabama. And we moved down, and this one was between Cherokee Nation and Georgia. In this one, it says that the courts held that tribes were not foreign states, but rather, in Justice Marshall's opinion, holds that tribes are domestic dependent nations whose relations with the U.S. resemble that of a ward to his guardian. So after they was taking your land without due compensation and then telling you was just a ward of the court, basically, 101 years later in 1932, the laws of Georgia could have no force in Cherokee territory. Here, Marshall defines Indian nations as distinct political communities. Pause. So you see where they went from domestic dependent nations or wards to his guardian to being distinct political communities in 1932. Then in 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act was enacted, which allowed the Secretary of Interior to acquire land and hold it in trust for any recognized Indian tribe now under federal jurisdiction. That was in 1934. So in 1935, you got this grant. So we need to go over and look at Mr. Will Rogers for a second. So here's Mr. Will Rogers right here on Wikipedia. Says he was born in 1879 in Cherokee Nation, Indian Territory. Now, what made Oklahoma the Indian Territory was the Trail of Tears of the 1830s. Okay, that's how the Cherokee got from right here in their original territory or land of thousands of years to over here in Oklahoma, right here in the northeastern part to down in the central part of the state of Oklahoma was the Cherokee Nation's territory from the 1830s to the end of the Civil War. So Will Rogers' people got to Oklahoma, Cherokee Nation, Indian Territory after the Civil War. As you can see right here, it says he was born in 1879. Now, if we go over here and look at a Civil War's battles map, you can see that major battles took place in the Cherokee Nation's territory in Oklahoma, right here, before Mr. Will Rogers was born there. But let's go back over here and read a little bit about what it says about Mr. Rogers. It says that in 1926, the high circulation weekly magazine, the Saturday Evening Post, financed a European tour for Rogers. In return for publication of his articles, Rogers made whirlwind visits to numerous European capitals and met with both the international figures and common people. His articles reflected a fear that Europeans would go to war again. Now, this is supposed to be a full-fledged Cherokee Indian worrying about Europeans going to war. He recommended isolationism for the United States. He reasoned that for the moment, American needs could best be served by concentrating on domestic questions and avoiding foreign entanglements. Goes on to say, he commented, America has a unique record. We never lost a war and we never won a conference in our lives. I believe that we could, without any degree of egotism, single-handed lick any nation in the world. Says Rogers was famous for his use of language. He effectively used up-to-date slang and invented new words to fit his needs. The last thing I'll say about him is that before his death, the state of Oklahoma commissioned a statue of Rogers to be displayed as one of the two it has in the National Statuary Hall collection of the United States Capitol. So they condemn us for using slang, which I prefer over perfect English any day. Yet one of the guys that they commissioned a statue for used slang and made up his own words. So we just learned that this grin, presumably or more than likely, came from the information inside these envelopes, which presumably was a letter from the Secretary of the Interior informing him that he had some land that was in a trust. Now, I can't go right in the numbers and show you what the population was in Oklahoma in the 1860s or 70s or 80s because they didn't start the count until 1890, where it says there was only 21,000 so-called blacks there. Yet you had 64,000 so-called American Indians. However, when we look over in Arkansas, the state right next to Oklahoma, the population in 1890 of the so-called blacks was over 300,000. So while Arkansas had over 300,000 so-called blacks in 1890, Oklahoma, the very next state, only had 21,000, they're saying. But a key factor to this is to be paid attention to right here is the white collar, where in the years of 1860 to 1870, the white population in Arkansas went up about 38,000, while the so-called black population only went up 11,000. Now, the very next decade, from 1870 to 1880, when we had a major influx of European immigration, the white population went up about 230,000, while the so-called black population went up roughly around 90,000 people. Now, one more thing I'd like to add back over here, the Oklahoma population. Right here is the white section. So they went from 172,000 to 670,000. So about a 500,000 or half a million population increase in a decade, while the black population only had a 34,000 increase. So if we know that this 64,000 in the American Indian column are those $5 Indians that we just spotted one or two right here, could this 670,000 be the relatives and friends of the 64,000? More than likely, those are the homesteaders who are given the land in grants and in lotteries through the Homestead Act starting in 1862 and forward. Now, on a side note, let's look one more time at Will Rogers. It said that he liked to use slang. He even was quoted as using the word licked in the exact context that we use it. The question is, where did he come up with the idea to use slang or make up his own words, which we know is Indian slash so-called Black American culture? So in order to get a better understanding of that, we need to go look over it where this man is from and where he was raised up at, which is Oklahoma, Cherokee Nation territory. Before we look at Tulsa, let's rewind a little bit and look at these battles again, where previously in a video I showed where Red River Parish and Richland Parish right here in North Louisiana came back on the census records to having thousands of people there right after the war and right after those parishes were created. And I also explained that how when they came back on those documents, they had basically undergone an identity change from Indian to Black, Negro, or colored. And I said that right there to say that in Oklahoma, particularly in the Cherokee Nation's territory, after these battles, the folks there were still there. They just had a identity change. So that when Europeans came in the 1870s, they were right up against are in some instances mixed in with the so-called black folks. And as we can see, Tulsa, Oklahoma is right here in Cherokee Nation territory. And if we go over and look at Tulsa, it has a Owasso, Katosa, Enola, and then a broken arrow. It says Owasso is a Osage Indian word meaning turnaround or end of the trail. But it goes on to say that Owasso began as a settlement in 1881, located at Cowici district of the Cherokee Nation in Indian Territory. Catoosa is a Cherokee word meaning a hill. Most of the times when Indians used words that referred to a hill, they were talking about a mound. And then Enola, though they say is an unknown origin and means light of heaven, according to a user from Colorado, United States, the name Enola is of Cherokee origin and means black fox. And that's the one I'm going to go with since Enola is in Cherokee Nation territory in Oklahoma. So what I'm getting at with all of this is that the guy, Will Rogers, grew up around Indians who were just learning the English language. So slang and making up their own words was culture. One more thing that needs to be added to this is that along with the battles of the so-called Civil War in the 1860s, in 1871, they passed a law called the Indian Appropriations Act of 1871. According to the Indian Appropriation Act of March 3rd, 1871, no longer was any group of Indians in the United States recognized as an independent nation by the federal government. Moreover, Congress directed that all Indians should be treated as individuals and legally designated wards of the federal government. Through the history books, which has all been a lie. So therefore, if it's a lie, then what's the truth? If it's a lie, then what's the truth?